Let me explain what it's like to be poor in America. First, you don't qualify for most programs that supposedly are for low-income people. You live in a community of most likely other low-income folks. Crime, ignorance, and just the aesthetics of poverty, you get used to a certain sense of neglect. You know the world doesn't care about you if you were to suddenly stop breathing and fall to your knees. So some guy wearing clinical gloves, as to say, I don't even want to contaminate myself with whatever it was that you touched, comes in, clears your desk with disgust, placing your personal effects in a cardboard box, something they couldn't even be bothered buying from an actual store. No, it's something they find from the last pizza party or something someone picks up from the recycling bin. Being poor in America means living in non-community communities. No one knows each other. The community is pretty transient between Section 8 housing or low-income rental property. The individuals, families, or whomever is either coming or going. There's a collective sense that no one really owns anything, so as a result, no one invests in the community. These are places that usually get referred to as non-place places by architects. Non-places are the areas of the country that look like any other part of the country. There's no actual defining property or feature that screams place or location. It's a physical manifestation of something that AI would probably generate if you type in the prompt box suburban, rural, or city setting. Being poor in America means education is a joke. You probably are stuck going to your feeder school. The school is overcrowded, lacking current textbooks, teachers who barely want to be there, and most likely could care less if you actually understood or obtained the information. The facility itself looks like a prison. It looks like a place that no one actually would want to choose to be in. The windows have bars or gates on them, unkempt grass, weather-washed paint, rusted gates that separate the property from the rest of the dilapidated cityscape. There's just an overall roughness to all of it. Being poor in America means traveling outside your community to find quality goods for your family and household. You wait on unreliable, overcrowded buses with packages in hand, struggling to find room on a bus where everyone looks just as angry about you being there as you are. And you don't dare brush your bags against anyone or accidentally step on someone's foot as the driver of the bus seems to purposefully jerk the bus in successive start and stops just to hassle everyone on board for daring to be on the bus in the first place. But let's say you choose the one grocery store that's in your actual community. As you enter, the security guard stares you down because there you already are guilty of theft and you need to prove that you aren't there to steal anything further. As you navigate these stores, nothing is actually where it's supposed to be. Things are haphazardly organized, and the staff are annoyed that you dare even ask them anything about anything. Finding something real to eat is a real adventure. Sure, there's plenty of prepackaged quote-unquote food that is technically edible but will wreak havoc on your health long term. Being poor in America means going to work at a job you definitely hate. It's purely an operation of just keeping a roof over your head and food on your plate. Half of your check is going to cover rent, bills, and food and groceries, while the other half covers emergencies and other life items. Now, if you actually are trying to save money, you'll find a way to save about a third of your pay each pay period. Your head is technically above water, but if you aren't running full speed weekly, you will definitely drown. Sure, you technically have paid time off, but you need to be strategic about when and where you can use them. What happens if an actual emergency happens? What happens if you actually have something come up that you need to deal with? You don't actually have time to take off and actually enjoy rest. Now, most of what I described there is life under Democrat rule in major metros around the country. Sure, some of these are personal gripes or annoyances of living in a modern city, but when you travel abroad and you see what life looks like in other cities in Western countries, you just begin to ask yourself, what's going on here? Why are we being conditioned to accept slop and degradation and neglect as if that's the way it's supposed to be? I've barely scratched the surface of what real working poverty looks like in this country, but the supposed party of the working class, the Democrat Party who runs these cities, do nothing to offer anything that remotely looks like change. Now, if you still aren't convinced, if you say this sounds more like complaining than actual policy changes a government could or should implement, just keep in mind that people who live in these communities aren't just drones moving through space. These people act out. And the acting out is what is causing a lot of problems plaguing America today. I'll speak more on that later in this episode of how I think this acting out is affecting our country. Now, you think to yourself, okay, let me listen to the candidates talk and see which one of these people are speaking to any of the day-to-day quality of life issues that matter to you. Instead, you hear them discuss all the issues that have no impact on your life, mostly, but then when they are discussing them, they're dancing around those issues. They are having the most superficial and surface-level bumper sticker quote-unquote conversations. They seem more interested in loyalty to an ideology and whatever interest group they have secretly backing them, instead of real constituents and solving real problems most of the people are having. Then, when they get elected, doesn't matter who, your rat race continues. Maybe one additional program or the stoppage of some other policy has marginal impact on daily life is introduced or removed, but no real meaningful relief. Now, while all this is happening, we are told that Putin and the mullahs are actually the reason for why your life sucks. Remember the whole Putin price hike? Well, nowadays they don't even mention that. Instead, these comic book villains are just simply why the lives of their citizens in their respective countries aren't going so well. You no longer are voting on policies that are at least advertised about how it helps your life. It's policies targeted at shaping the larger globe, and by some magical usage of the transitive property will mean that maybe your life improves. Or maybe it doesn't. Just be a quiet, grateful patriot and support the troops, you anti-Semitic communist Nazi heathen. Now, I don't mean to sound like I'm going on some Chomsky-esque tirade, but I want to remind my fellow conservatives that Donald Trump won, and won in major metro cities, gaining record numbers of historically out-of-reach demographics for the Republican Party for a reason. I am describing to you real issues that voters in this part of the coalition have. There comes a time when the rot and the degeneracy comes to a full head and people say enough. And the election of 2024 proves it. But to this day, there are many in the GOP that still want to operate business as usual. With the latest round of propagandistic sludge being spewed about the conflict raging in the Middle East, I'm wondering when people of this country will finally stand up and say enough. We've had enough. We are done with the policies that led us to Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, and now Iran. We aren't in 2003. Back then, the country was more cohesive, and we suffered a major terror attack, and the country wanted answers and wanted revenge. Even then, there were cracks and points of conflict that made the selling of that war difficult. It's 1964, a country definitely still united by the togetherness fostered by World War II and the victory, but even then, that was the closest our country had come to civil war since the first Civil War. None of these institutions, people, or goodwill exist today. America is a powder keg sitting on a dry field with bundles of firewood and tumbleweed. Another distraction based in a false flag or a message or massaging of the facts or good old-fashioned yellow journalism will cause this country to explode, in my opinion. It isn't that I don't think America could deal a military defeat to Iran. Sure, it may be a lot tougher than anyone realizes, but the real strain comes the day after the regime falls. Even if everything works out perfectly and the Crown Prince returns with open arms to his people, the region still remains destabilized, and the balance of power greatly shifted. The continued fact that policymakers in Washington fail to see or ignore what the future would and should look like is a cancerous problem that creates chaos in the world and should be responded to. It's time to come out and say it. I fundamentally oppose American foreign policy. In my opinion, America is the greatest source of evil in the world currently and must be checked. And here is why. America spreads wokeness. America spreads cultural rot. America arbitrarily picks winners and losers globally. Most of what quote-unquote benefits America is simply based on whatever benefits the ruling wealth-extracting class, and all of this is set against the backdrop of what an increasing amount of Americans experience on a day-to-day basis, as described earlier. Now, some of you will be greatly shocked, taken aback, standing with mouths agape. that I would have the temerity and the audacity to say that America is the greatest source of evil in the world today. Many of these types of people who love to invoke the imagery of the great founding mythology of our current age, the Great World War II, will say, but America fought against Hitler and the Nazis and spread freedom and democracy throughout the world. How is America evil? Well, first I would say, why is a form of government evil? Was every human society before the founding of democracy evil? How would you define freedom? Now, what I had just described applies to about half of the population. There's a good considerable amount of people living in this country who are living paycheck to paycheck, who are not able to afford basic necessities of just, trying to make it through life. And one of the things I find myself really mostly disturbed by, and especially coming from people I would consider my allies, people who are Reformed or just Christians in general, there's a thinking of, no one ever comes out and says this, right? But it's more, if you have and somebody doesn't have, it's because the person that has is working hard, honoring the Lord, and are righteous, and so therefore they are rewarded by the fruits of their hard work. And the people that don't, or who are struggling, are doing so because they aren't living up to what God has given them or commanded them, and so therefore their lives are full of toil and stress and struggle. And so those that have because they deserve and are righteous, and those that don't have because they are undeserving and unrighteous. Now, again, no one's really ever come out and said this. No one has told me in a church ever, anywhere, these words verbatim. But when pressed on their ideology and what they believe, this is what usually comes out. Now, why am I spending so much time talking about what religious folks in the country think and feel? Besides, there's a lot of other types of people who live in the country. But I think it's important because I think the founding mythology of the country, it's people coming mostly from Britain, and they're bringing this kind of Reformed Calvinist perspective. It's a Protestant view. You've heard of the Protestant work ethic. Well, this is kind of where that comes from. And these people apply this to modern politics and the way wealth is created and distributed in the country. I think also mixing in the factor that we are still living in a kind of post-communist reaction world, that all of these things have kind of blended together to kind of create this cacophony of exactly what I just laid out. Those that have because they are righteous. They are working hard. They're honoring the Lord. And so therefore they are living fruitful lives. And the people that don't have, and they deserve not to have because they are unrighteous. They're not following the Lord. They are not working hard. And so that's why their lives look the way that it does. And I think that this is a completely negligent and short-sighted and frankly ignorant way of wrestling and dealing with the world. There are so many people in this country who get up working hard, 1, 2, 3 jobs, and are married, have kids, providing for each other and their kids, but are being squeezed and pressed. Now, maybe you think that's the way the world should work. That's the way it's supposed to be. There's somehow fulfillment and goodness in that. And I personally, I don't see it. I think there's a lot of people, when I look at where all of these ideologies, and switching gears, because I know I probably sounded like a Chomskyite just now. If you're looking at why there's so much wokeness, where is all of the BLM, for instance, or all the feminism, or all of the LGBTQ activism? Where is all this coming from? I mean, it's coming from people who are exactly living these types of lives, who are trying to make sense and explain, why is it that I feel like I'm doing everything that was told of me to do? I went to school. I am working hard. I don't believe that we should totally just redistribute wealth from those that have and just give to poor people. But I also want to feel like I can succeed. I want to feel like I can actually achieve something and not just grind myself into a fine powder on a week in, week out basis. And I want to actually build wealth. I want to actually give something to my kids. I want to see the mobility, the upward mobility that America and those that purport America promise. So when you interrogate these things, you try to find out, well, why is it that people, I described earlier, who might be living in that cityscape? I mean, personally, I'll back up and say my own story personally was shaped largely by what I saw. Like everything I just described is, these are scenes I've seen in my head as I've grown up in my own community in North Philadelphia. I've seen these things. And I had a mom who's very devout, who worked very hard. I mean, she would disagree with me most likely on a lot of my political stances I have today. She also agrees with me on some, but she's not exactly she's not a welfare queen. She's somebody, and neither were my grandparents. These are people who believed in the concept of hard work, the kind of good old American roll your sleeves up, get dirty, and put in a hard day's work. And I saw her struggle. Now, she didn't do everything right, but she made the most of what she had, and she blamed herself if there was to be any blame. She looked inward and looked inward in the sense of didn't look to the government. The government wasn't supposed to step in to make things right with her. It was more, what can I do with the help of the Lord to get ahead? And I think growing up in that circumstance, I see that there's a lot of people who fall through the cracks. They're not wealthy. They're not impoverished to the extent that they're homeless. And I think they're kind of the comic book version of what I think a lot of conservative wealthy people might think of people who are struggling in the country. She's not that, but she occupies this middle ground, this middle space, and she's not middle class, mind you. There's a term that's used, kind of the precariat class. You're not proletarian, like you're not a worker, you're not like a laborer, kind of just not sure where their next job or meal is coming from, but you're also not middle class by any stretch of any imagination. You're not established. You don't have a home that is comfortably yours, that you can comfortably afford the mortgage or the rents for. It's something of treading water, keeping your head above the water, and the water's up to your nose, So what I'm trying to get at is there's a lot of people in the country who live like that, who don't really have anyone representing them. There's no one speaking to them. There's no policy or public infrastructure that addresses those needs. And so as an outgrowth, there has been a steady adoption of ideologies and worldviews that will help explain. So, for instance, if you're, again, coming from my neighborhood in a North Philadelphia, predominantly black working class neighborhood, Black Lives Matter is going to have a lot of purchase. Black Lives Matter, you're looking around and you're seeing everybody that looks like you seems to be struggling. And then, 2 miles up the road, you enter a more predominantly white, affluent neighborhood, and you see things are completely radically different. That's going to look like to you, like that's set up. And then given the country's history of actual, there was enslavement, there was actual bigotry in that regard. And I want to use these terms loosely, so please don't come down my throat just yet, conservatives, if you're hearing me use these words. But people who are seeing these things, listening to Black Lives Matter explain this narrative, and you've heard nothing else before. No one else in your family has tried to wrestle with these issues. No one's really tried to explain, like give a counter narrative or to the extent that anyone has spoken about it, I mean, it's just in the water. I mean, growing up, I used to hear this all the time. It's like it was spoken in code and hushed kind of tones, but it basically gets at this underlying racial narrative that this is set up. It's set up in a racialized way that white people in America have rigged the system and rigged the game against us as black people. And so therefore, that's why things in our neighborhood and our communities look and feel the way they do. And obviously, I think this is a false anthropology. I think that there's a lot of problems I have with it. I mean, number one, it's not true. I think there's a lot of things that when I look at the black community in America, I think there's a lot of self-harm that's done. And today's podcast is not going to get into that and unpack what those things are. But there are these things. Fatherlessness is a huge one. The breakdown in the family unit, the overindulgence of kind of materialism and kind of carnal activity. I mean, I think there's a lot of just lack of discipline in the community, and people are not going to like me saying that, but it's just true. I grew up in it. I see it. I've seen it. And like that is there. That's a huge component of what is going wrong in these communities. However, it's exasperated by the fact that there's really no attempt to try to alleviate any of the problems in these communities. And as a result, or at the very least, when people try to attempt to make any noise at addressing these issues, you're immediately dismissed as a communist. You're dismissed as a tax and spend liberal who just doesn't seem to understand fiscal responsibility, and it's just an attempt to punish the rich and to punish the hardworking people in this country. And so you hear that enough times, and you're like, okay, well then it's a conspiracy. Right, it's an attempt to try to hold me and my people back, because again, all you see are people that look like you in these communities, and so now Black Lives Matter comes along, promises you the world, and says, look, we can have nice things, we can have a better world in society if we basically have the revolution, but we organize it around the principles of race. And so that is the danger that I see, and that's the danger I've been speaking about, and that's the danger I've been trying to explain to my conservative friends, because again, I'm a recent convert to conservatism, but I'm not a Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher conservative. I mean, it's not just the market's rule, you know. It's not just again, going back, it's not just the righteous have and the unrighteous don't have. The world is way more complicated than that. That's not the way it is. So that's the first thing. And so out of this outgrowth, right? So you've got all this BLM bubbling, and it's a convenient narrative because a lot of Western countries have had their dalliances with racism or bigotry, and again, not putting any value judgments on any of these things just yet. I think these are loaded terms. They have a lot of unpacking to do, but a lot of these countries in the West have had this problem, or perceive themselves of having this problem. And so when a George Floyd happens, you've got Europe having protests, BLM protests in Europe. And as an American, you know, somebody observing at the time, I'm sitting there thinking, why the hell is there BLM protests in London? Why in the hell are there BLM protests in Cologne or in Berlin? This makes no sense. The only explanation for why that is the case is because America is exporting this ideology. It's a global movement that's made possible by the global connectedness of the Western world. With the Western hegemon, the United States, kind of being the producer of culture, the producer of this ideology. So that, to me, I think represents a massive problem. And I think when you delve into it even deeper, right, you think about the migration, the way we talk about migration. I want to focus on the conversation in Europe in particular. I think it all goes back to 2015 with Angela Merkel opening the doors of Europe to the Syrian migrants, and then kind of opening that even further to the rest of the third world, having all these people just flood Europe, and with the backdrop for Germany in particular, with the mythology of the World War II narrative in the background, but for countries like France or the UK or whoever, it's colonization, empire, you name it, or complicity in World War II if your country was taken over. You obviously have Vichy France in particular. This is all stewing, and so it makes the doors open to accepting the narratives of things like BLM. And when that happens, you've got America exporting this liberal worldview, imposing it on these countries, and then these countries are just regurgitating it, turning it into their own micro versions, like it's BLM UK style or BLM France style or BLM Germany style. And, so it's applied in their particular ways and for those countries, but it's all part of the same negative worldview and culture. And I think conservatives, especially in America, when they look at Putin, and Putin is smart. I mean, he's played on this. He's spoken at length about it in kind of offhand ways. I mean, he's setting up his country as kind of the anti-West. It's the return to form of old Europe. He's the beacon of Europe of old and a return to traditionalism as a counterbalance, as a counter narrative to the narratives of the West. And for him, and I think reasonably so, the arch producer of these narratives being the United States. So I think it's maybe worth drilling into exactly what that means. How is it that America is producing these things, and how is it that America is spreading these things? Well, I mean, I think if you step back, there are multiple forms of power. There's hard power, there's soft power, and there's economic power. We all know what hard power is. Hard power is the military. I think World War II is critical in the formation of the concept of hard power for the United States, in that after the war, all of these troops stationed in major European, cities or localities, these soldiers are there, and bases are formed around their station, their position. And it's a reminder of American hard power. America has, had set up these treaties after the war with Germany, and with, we'll get to Asia, I guess, later, but we'll just focus on Germany for now. Set up these treaties and are very much done in a way. I mean, the narrative is that, hey, there's the Berlin airlift. We helped rebuild West Germany, and now America and Germany are partners. We're geopolitical partners. Isn't that great? Isn't that nice? We're partners now. We're friends. We're allies. And I really don't look at it that way. I mean, it's really an empire and a vassal state. And that is very much the way America and Germany relate to each other. Now, obviously, there's a lot of, I think, over the years since the war has ended, obviously, there's a thawing. And I think a lot of people who are working in the State Department or who are in the upper echelon of the military or whomever, they have a much more cordial relationship, and it's not as like this kind of conquered kind of setup explicitly. But as I said before to someone, I was like, have Germany try to do something that actually fundamentally contradicts American geopolitics, or goes against something that Washington really desperately wants to do. Take Nord Stream 2, for instance. America basically interfered with Germany's domestic discussions of, whether or not they should pursue importing Russian gas at a cheaper rate through the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And this was seen as completely unforgivable. It must be stopped because it doesn't align with America's interests. And so there you go. You have a situation where Nord Stream 2 has been, well, now it's been blown up, but that's an example of something that I think would have worked for Germany. It's Germany pursuing its own interests that America said, nope, not that. Nope, you can't have that. And so I think when we have these conversations about when I say to people, look, I think America is exporting an ideology. I think it's the biggest source of evil right now in the world. It's supporting an ideology that's slowly destroying Europe, in my opinion. It's creating the conditions by which people can justify, well, listen, we were terrible people in the past. We need to atone for that eternally. And, the systems, the architecture that was set up in the post World War II world that was led by America with the specific intent of keeping certain countries like Germany and Italy and Japan perpetually cooked, for lack of a better word, to America. And I think over time, right? So that's the original genesis of these ideologies or institutions, rather. And over time, they turn into, you build on them, you live with them. Successive generations now have lived with this new kind of status quo. And so you justify it. New language is brought in to kind of justify it. And so now you've got the situation where it's now not just Germany. It's now the UK. It's the French. It's the Irish. It's the Spaniards. It's everybody who's bought into this new paradigm of the U.S. is the empire and we are its vassal client states. And for a short time, it was set up so that way the European governments can spend more time. They don't have to worry about their defense now because America's going to take care of that. They spend more of their time on creating the nanny state, the welfare state. They're able to have all these robust programs that they then turn to Americans and say consistently, oh, you Americans, you're too warlike, you're too militaristic, you're not as advanced as we are because we were able to come up with all of these great institutions like healthcare and education and infrastructure that we were able to do all these immaculate, amazing things. And it's like, well, yeah, you were because you weren't having to pay for your military. You weren't having to pay for your defense. You weren't having to pay for, the fact that I don't have the numbers in front of me, but over several decades, at least 30 or 40 years, no NATO country in Europe in particular has been, well, obviously only in Europe, but no NATO country actually made their 2% minimum marker for defense spending. And you look at something like that and you're like, well, how is that possible? And I think it's possible for two reasons. One, America wanted it that way. It likes it that way. It means that America remains the undisputed military champ in the Western Hemisphere at the very least. And so Washington basically can constantly kind of strong arm its way through whatever policy it wants. But on the other hand, it's also propped up because you've got politicians in Europe who look at that and say, well, listen, I can be even more delusional. I can vote in and propose more outlandish, outrageous left-wing policies that are increasingly divorced from anything that represents reality because, well, hey, it's actually possible. Like, if I don't have to pay for this, if there's something I don't have to pay for that's outsourced to another entity altogether, I can now provide, basically quote unquote free education. I can provide free healthcare. I can provide, I can pave the streets with gold for all I care. It's like this is how this happens. And I think you get a population in Europe that gets accustomed to this comfortable lifestyle where no one's really people are working, but no one's innovating. I mean, the idea, the concept of work in Europe is not like how we see it in America. And by the way, I think that both continents, both countries, both regions, whatever, they have the concept of work completely wrong. I mean, again, well, there's plenty to say on America. The American view of work, it's completely retarded. It needs to be. It's unhealthy. I think it's corrosive. I think it causes a lot of the cancer that I'm fighting against. That's being pushed around the world, but also. I think in Europe, this kind of, no one's building anything. No one's really creating anything. It's kind of everything's comfortable as it is. We have all of these really archaic bureaucratic systems that are labyrinth. It's a maze of just stuff that you have to go through just to start a new business or do something new. All these codes, regulations, all this stuff. So no one really does anything. You've got the major people already set up. So no one's really. I mean, people are obviously poor, but there's kind of like sure, we'll just kind of slit our wrists and slip into the warm bath water of decline and kind of just go down this managed slope of decline. I'm able to still watch my sports ball. I can drink on the weekends. I can fornicate, but I also have my health care. I have my job. I can take my vacation. And there's nothing really, there's no meaning behind any of that. And a lot of people are okay with that. So, and it's created. I mean, I think for me, where this comes from, I've had this question for so long about why is it, it's like, okay, I say I want somebody to check America's excesses. And none of these countries are capable. Just none of them are. I looked at how the Trump-Zelensky showdown went. I mean, it was great. It was very, very therapeutic to watch Trump just kind of, slap around Zelensky. I think this guy is a blowhard and is full of himself. And so it was great to kind of see him kind of get cut to size a little bit there. But the responses of all these European countries, scrambling. They're trying to figure out. Macron's holding, meeting after meeting. We have a meeting to have another meeting about another meeting to address the issue of having a meeting about finding a way to deal with our lackluster defense capabilities. Watching all that in real time, I just look and I'm seeing here like all of their leaders are feckless, incompetent, and cowardly people. I mean, I just full stop. None of these people have my respect at all. Zero, end of story. Left, right, or center. None of them are capable of actually leading their countries and delivering the frankly, the glories that their countries used to live up to. I joke around all the time. I think that all of their people who were the doers, the creatives, the explorers, the adventurers, the bold men and women that shaped, I think, Western society, either all those people are dead or they came to America. So it's like what's left is this kind of rump state of people who are just used to a managed decline, a managed kind of mediocrity, a managed middling. It's not too great, it's not too low. It's kind of the Goldilocks zone of no growth. And again, not to say that we should be slaves to make GDP go up, make line go up politics, but we also should be, as human beings, as people created by God. I think we're designed to achieve, designed to do things. We're like, especially men. as a guy, I'm sitting here like I have so much energy, so much stuff I want to do and accomplish. It's not that I don't want to do things. I'm raring to go, but you want to work on the things that you think you find meaning in, and things that God maybe placed on your heart or whatever. But yeah, I mean, in Europe, you that's been kind of made null and void. It's been supplanted by, well, hey, all your basic needs are met. All that really is there left to do is really John, Lennon's song of, no country, imagine no country, no cause to fight for, nothing above us, nothing below us. It's just the perpetual here and now. And that's Europe. So, yeah, I mean, I think that situation is slowly, very slowly starting to change, starting to turn. But I think fundamentally, the world order that has been set up is this kind of symbiotic, parasitic, maybe relationship of Western Europe and the United States, where the United States is kind of this unhealthy behemoth of productivity and perpetual militarism, bolstered by unhinged and kind of not really rooted in reality idealism and frivolousness and a kind of a lack of robustness, a lack of self-will. And so, again, makes it easy, open for ideologies that are corrosive and corrupt to come to the continent from the U.S., because the U.S. can kind of push and strong arm itself into these countries. So anyway, that's hard power. There's soft power, which I also talked about. Soft power is basically culture. It's music, movies. It's crazy. I went to Europe for the first time starting in like 2023, 24. And it's wild. You turn on the radio there, and I'm listening to American pop music, with sprinkled in, some French or some German or some whatever country that you're in music. And then when they are having their own artists, a lot of them are singing in English, or they'll have some element sung in English. And it's like, this is crazy. That now it's changing in the U.S. I'm starting to see a lot more music today where you'll have Spanish being sung in the song or whatever. It'll be hitting the top of the charts. But, again, it's just like all this stuff. I mean, I had an experience. I was in a bar at one of the German bars, and they're playing like, ratchet ghetto music from the US. And I'm sitting here like, why is this a thing? Why is this possible? I should not travel 3,000 miles just to listen to the same BS that I'm trying to escape from here in the States. I don't want to listen to that. I'm in a cold, different country. I want to listen to different types of music. I want to experience a completely, totally different culture. It's funny to me with the World War II boomer narrative. It's like, if it weren't for us, everyone would be speaking German. And, putting aside the fact, it's like, okay, like, why is that the worst thing in the world? But it's like, oh, so I guess it's better now that everybody's speaking English. I guess. So much for fighting against, empire and all that stuff. I mean, it's just the empire, but it's the English empire. It's everybody now speaks English around the world as opposed to Latin or German or you name it. I don't know. I just always find that kind of fascinating and interesting to me. But yeah, the door is open to kind of these cultural attitudes, this music that's coming over, and sure, maybe call me a fuddy-duddy, call me somebody who's just like, oh, your kids are having fun. You don't want to let people to have fun. It's not about fun. It's just why is this stuff there? So anyway, there's that, and then there's the economic power that the U.S. has. I mean, everything in politics is to uphold the global capitalist system. And again, this is not like a Chomsky-esque or a Slavoj Žižek-esque attack on markets or capitalism per se, but it's the international globalist style capitalism that basically guts and uproots whole populations. It's the driving factor for why so many people who are in the corporate world are totally fine with, like, yeah, we'll hire illegal migrant laborers. We'll pay them pennies, but that's better than what they would have probably been paid in their home countries. They'll work for way cheaper for us here. and we can pocket the difference, and line our pockets with it. And you have a deracinated indigenous population. You have all these hordes of people coming in from all over the world that don't care, frankly, about the country they're moving into. It's just an economic opportunity for them. So it's this kind of, it's been a meme at this point, but it's an economic zone. It's you devalued the country into an economic zone. And the only thing that matters are the lines on the chart. Did GDP go up? Is line going up? Up and to the right. Line must go up and to the right. And so if that's all that matters politically, in your country, then you don't have a country. That's not a country. It's not a people. That's not a history. There's nothing there to protect. And then they wonder, why aren't there, young men willing to sign up and enlist to go fight, whatever boogeyman that they've created for, this generation. But the reason is, well, fight for what exactly? What am I laying my life on the line for? What am I fighting for? What am I signing up to defend exactly? Pride marches, I guess, in Kandahar, or drag queen story hour in Colombia. I don't know. It's just this kind of becomes the kind of the ruling ideology. The pride progress flag is the flag of the empire of the West. It's the thing that's marching through the globe, and I think people like Putin and Xi and other world leaders are attempting to resist and stand up to. And so if in that alone, I understand and actually support their willingness and desire to kind of blunt the march of that around the world. I don't want that marched around the world. So, and then I think the other issue for me is when I look at, the state of conservatism in Western Europe, it's just, ever since the Second World War, it's just not possible. A country like Germany, for instance, it's like, you're basically stuck choosing between crazy left wing, or like left wing light. There really is no conservative party in really Europe, or at least in Western Europe, and to the extent that they're conservatives, it's much more of this kind of, Thatcher, Reagan kind of style neoliberal economic policy. There's really no sense in it's not the type of conservatism of preserving culture, preserving tradition. You're certainly not seeing a whole lot of vocal social conservatives, people who are saying like, let's go back to the Bible as a basis for legislating morality and presenting and standing and discerning what is right and what is wrong. You don't certainly see that anywhere in Western Europe because of the, I think, spinelessness of a lot of the conservatives that are in those countries. I think there's a lot of those people there who are afraid because they have speech laws that'll throw you in jail, codes of conduct. There's really no real Bill of Rights that we understand in the States that applies over in Europe. And so, yeah, like, the government they can come in and say, hey, you have, Brexity sounding books lying on your shelf. That sounds suspicious to us. And if you're doing something, like you said a hate crime or you said a hate speech, that'll land you in jail. And so that stifles any ability for actual conservatism. But I also don't think that's an excuse. I think that the people over in those countries need to stand and need to not be afraid to speak the truth and speak it in a way that's forceful and unapologetic. So yeah, I think I'm not really necessarily holding my breath that a country in Western Europe is going to offer a solid check on some of the American excesses. But I am happy to see what's going on in Poland. I am happy to see what's going on in Hungary. I'm happy to see that there are some in the Western Bloc that are more Eastern, to be honest, but are able to say, look, we will adopt some of the values and customs of, you know, America and as it's been understood traditionally for the past 80 years, but we're not willing to basically sell the store. We're not willing to go and live hedonistic and rootless and deracinated lives. So that's really what I mean when I say I think America is spreading evil around the world. That's kind of a cursory overview of what it is that I have, my rubric of how I look and judge foreign policy. There's a lot more to it than that, but I'm going to leave it here for now. Let me know what you think in the comments. And yeah, I plan to dress these up a lot more, make them a lot better in quality. I'm kind of experimenting with a lot. There's a lot of things on my mind, things I want to share. Yeah, I'm kind of going back and forth on different styles, but yeah, if, I'm here to have a conversation. If people want to talk to me, I'll definitely try to respond. And, yeah, have a nice day and we'll talk.